Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the 17th Legion, has spent his existence in search of one thing, the truth. Of all the Emperor's sons, Lorgar stands out as an enigma of sorts, often misunderstood and disregarded as nothing more than the heretical catalyst for the galaxy's burning. But there's more to the Urizen than many would care to admit. When discussing Lorgar, most will point out his role in setting the groundwork for humanity's greatest tragedy, the Horus Heresy. For it is true that he was the first of the superhuman Primarchs to fall to the temptations of chaos. But given the circumstances and tribulations of his own life, it is hard to see a timeline where this didn't occur. In the Emperor's secret gene facility located deep under Holy Terra, there were 20 capsules containing the beginning of humanity's greatest specimens. The future Primarch known as Lorgar Aurelian would be one of these few. And just as the rest of his brothers were scattered throughout the galaxy by the forces of chaos, he would also find himself upon a faraway world. It could be said that the moment Lorgar's capsule landed on the planet of Colchis, his fate was set in stone. For the world reveled in its traditions of worship and praise for the gods. These gods were permanent, unyielding. As civilizations rose and empires fell, the gods remained. Taken in by an exiled priest, Lorgar was brought into a life of worship, and in this worship he excelled. His extraordinary skills in charisma and speech made gaining followers a simple task. He meticulously studied the Colchisian religion later known as the Old Ways. This religion revolved around 4 gods, but Lorgar deemed that they were simply lesser manifestations of what was the true deity of Colchis, a being that the entire planet would eventually worship as the god emperor of mankind. Armed with his new faith, Lorgar would spread his influence over Colchis without much issue. His almost inhuman way with words and sermons gave him everything he needed to carve out his own empire. An empire that would revolve around the worship of the One. All of this is to say, Lorgar's upbringing and his claim to conquest all derived from one thing, faith. His faith that one day a deity clad in shining bronze armor would arrive, just as he had prophesied to his followers. This day would come, and the figure Lorgar had prophesied would step foot on Colchis. We of course know this figure as the Emperor of Mankind, who at this time was embarked upon his great crusade. This event completed Lorgar. It gave him the truth he so desperately searched for. His God stood before him, and any doubt among the populace of his prophetic abilities would surely be washed away. The truth is that as much as Lorgar had changed Colchis and its people, the old ways would never truly be forgotten. The worship displayed on Colchis upon the Emperor's arrival was shunned by the ruler, as it directly went against his tenets of atheism and rationality presented in the imperial truth. However, at the time his attention was far too focused on the crusade to effectively do anything about this annoyance. Once reunited with his emperor, Lorgar and his new legion, designated the Imperial Heralds, would storm the galaxy as part of the Great Crusade. In the early stages of his involvement, Lorgar had managed to keep his true beliefs about the Emperor's godhood at bay, but it was only a matter of time before his true faith began to show and spread throughout the new members of his legion. As mentioned earlier, the Emperor's arrival on Colchis was no doubt the most important moment in Lorgar's life up until that point. It had given him everything he had ever searched for. To deny this newfound meaning would be fruitless. With that being said, the Primarch would eventually see his entire legion converted into the religious zealotry that he had harbored in every inch of his soul. This conversion was finally completed when Lorgar had his legion retitled to the Word-Bearers. Ironically, the new institutions within the 17th Legion, such as chaplains, would no doubt have been seen as abominations to the wider Imperium during the Great Crusade. But it was these very same institutions that would make their way into every Space Marine Legion after the heresy. Perhaps the most important thing to note about the Legion at this time was its method of waging war. It was not the internal policies or practices of the 17th that eventually put them on the radar of the War Council, but the way that they inducted conquered worlds into the Imperium. The newly christened Word-Bearers were relatively slow when it came to processing new conquests compared to the rest of the Space Marine legions. Worlds were methodically indoctrinated into the religion that would one day become known as the Imperial Cult. Lorgar pioneered the belief of the Emperor as God to these peoples. while his legion would raise untold numbers of shrines and monuments across all territory within the 17th Legion's front. This was all in stark contrast to the inconceivable destruction that would befall many planets caught in the midst of the wider Great Crusade. The worlds under Lorgar's legion would be unquestionably compliant to their new Imperium. The only issue was that it was an Imperium that would not accept their fanatic zeal. This was not helped by the fact that these conquests were limited. For every world the 17th conquered, another legion would take multiple times more. It is almost beyond doubt that the worlds indoctrinated by the Word-Bearers were more stable and loyal to the Imperium as a whole than the ones conquered by most other legions, but in the case of the Great Crusade, quantity seemed to outshine quality. Although it should be mentioned once again that in the eyes of the Greater Imperium, the religion found on these worlds would be seen as impractical. It was this ineffectiveness regarding the Word-Bearers' speed of conquest that would finally bring the Emperor's fury down on them. The Emperor was not clueless to his son's continued zealotry during the Crusade. He merely chose to ignore it in the face of his current obligations regarding humanity's greatest conquest seen in ages. But this toleration could not continue forever. As expeditions sent to planets conquered by the Word-Bearers reported back to the War Council, it became all too clear as to why the 17th had slowed so drastically in their conquest. Entire worlds had been turned into living shrines to the Emperor, every being on them unquestionably loyal to their god. This was why the Legion's progress had ground to a near halt. When word of this reached the Emperor, he decided that the issue could not be ignored any longer. In the earlier years of the Word-Bearers' participation in the Crusade, their beliefs regarding the godhood of the Emperor were much more lax. The fanaticism of Lorgar and many of his confidants had yet to fully spread to all within the Legion. This is what kept the Emperor's hand at bay. But the time for consequence had come. The Emperor gathered the Legion of Ultramar and set out to correct his son's misguided faith. The Emperor's choice in the Ultramarines is something of note, as the Legion represented everything the leader of mankind wanted from his greatest soldiers. They were similar to the Word-Bearers in the way of their unquestionable loyalty, but differed in the way they waged war and conducted conquest. The Ultramarines were violent and ruthless during their campaigns, bringing countless worlds under the indomitable boot of the Imperium. They did this all while being free from the grasp of any sort of religion, exemplifying the tenets of rationality and reason that the Emperor had built his Imperium on. The stark blend of similarity and contrast between the two legions was also present in their Primarchs, as would be expected. Robote Guilliman was one of the Emperor's favored sons. He and his brother Primarchs would often look down upon Lorgar, believing him to be far too pacifistic and reserved about his true powers as one of the Emperor's own. Most of the other Primarchs were quick to violence and had no issue putting down rebellious worlds in a timely manner. Their success was beyond doubt, but any other type of conquest was seen as ineffective. As a result, Lorgar was seen as weak by his kin. This combined with the Emperor's coming wrath would set him on a path to darkness. By the time the Emperor and his task force of Ultramarines arrived in Word-Bearer space, it was clear that the 17th Legion's religious zeal had reached a peak. On the world of Kur sat the capital city of Monarchia. Monarchia was deemed a perfect city by the Word-Bearers, as the city hosted perhaps the most devoted of populations conquered by their legion. Countless cathedrals and monuments lined its streets, all dedicated to the God Emperor. This, of course, made it the perfect target for the Emperor's lesson. The Ultramarines were ordered to bring the city to ruin, every last inch of it razed and broken. This is the sight that the entirety of the Word-Bearers would be forced to witness, their holy city eradicated. This was not all, however, as the Emperor would make sure that every member of the devout legion heard his admonishment regarding their belief in him as a god. There was no doubt now. The Emperor had made his stance clear. What was left was a broken legion, a legion without a soul. They were stripped of that which made them who they were, that which fueled them. They were stripped of faith. As mentioned earlier, faith is what made Lorgar. Everything he had ever gained or accomplished was intrinsically linked to his faith. This also became true of his legion, once they had been fully converted to the ways of devout belief. When the Emperor came to Kur and denounced all that they were, it opened a hole in every member of the 17th, a hole that would be made full again by chaos. Certain members of the Legion, members who had worshipped the gods of old on Colchis, never truly forgot them. Chief among these were people such as Corpheron, Lorgar's adoptive father. He had worshipped the old gods long before Lorgar fell from the sky, and made it clear to the Primarch that he had never fully renounced his belief in them. This retained belief in the old ways began to spread throughout the Legion, just as Lorgar's belief in the God Emperor had before. In truth, the old gods of Colchis were merely the deities of chaos in a more favorable disguise. This new, twisted belief in the gods of chaos would first manifest itself in the Legion's old guard, the aforementioned legionnaires who had secretly never forgotten the original religion of Colchis. These Astartes would convince Lorgar, who had not yet fallen to the powers of chaos, that he must undertake a pilgrimage to find the primordial truth of the galaxy. It was on this pilgrimage that the seeds of the galaxy's burning were sown. There are two sides to the argument regarding the Emperor's decision to punish the Word-Bearers so severely. One side may say that the Emperor was correct in his assumption that religion was the true source of corruption by the ruinous powers, as the 17th and its reliance on faith led it down a path to the worship of chaos. But another may say that it was the Emperor's own actions that catapulted the Legion into a crisis of identity and meaning, a crisis that the Legion dragged itself out of by finding other deities to place their faith in. In my personal opinion, the Emperor failed to see what the 17th was. He and the rest of the Imperium were fooled into thinking that the Word-Bearers would simply continue on after the devastation on Kur. It can be said with near certainty that the Word-Bearers could not have existed as they did without faith, as their faith is what fueled them. It is who they were. Lorgar and his Legion were different. They did things in a way that was foreign to the rest of the Imperium. Their relatively peaceful occupation and transformation of worlds was simply not what the Great Crusade required. While I do see the Emperor's point with the Imperial truth, and actually do agree with most of it, I think his actions regarding the Word-Bearers were ultimately not the best for the galaxy. It is almost unthinkable that the Emperor could not foresee what might happen if he destroyed the Word-Bearers' identity. Perhaps he did, and it was part of his unknowable plan for the future of humanity. Perhaps the Emperor simply eradicating the Legion would have saved the galaxy from the fires of civil war. Regardless of the true intentions behind the fall of the Word-Bearers, and its Primarch, it remains one of the galaxy's greatest tragedies.